Okay, welcome everyone to today's very exciting video where we're going to do a motion breakdown on round one of the HWS round robin. Before that, I'd like to just make a couple of announcements. Firstly, I got a new mic so that you won't be hearing these like P and weird random sounds. So sorry about if that happened in the previous videos. As you can see, we're upgrading here. Secondly, apparently I learned that someone is taking these motion breakdowns, someone in China, and is selling it to Chinese school debaters for something like $100 a session or something like that. So firstly, if you have any information about this, please like message me so we can find who this person is, although I do have a suspect. And secondly, if you are doing this right now, like if you are stealing this video and you're showing it to anyone and asking money for it, please don't do so, because like these videos are free for everyone to watch on YouTube, and this is like super immoral. It might not be illegal, you can technically do it, but like, you know, shame on you for doing these particular things. That said, yeah, today we're doing HWS round robin. This video is the videos for HWS round robin are going to be a bit different, as I'll be doing both government and opposition and compounding it into one whole video. So let's see how this will turn out. Before that, I'd just like to start as a disclaimer. I am neither a historian nor an expert in international relations. I do not have any degree in either of the two matters. I'm just a debater who, like for the purposes of these workshops, I just want to help you guys improve by giving you ideas, lines of analysis, strategies, general debate knowledge, etc., etc. Please, please, please do your own independent research. Try to learn things about whether it's this topic or any other topic on the planet. Try to find like relevant resources. Be careful of fake news and things like that. This is the same. This motion that I'm going to break down is the same as my Ukraine war videos or any other IR motion that I'm doing. If for some reason, let's say you aren't, you don't want to watch this video, or you don't like certain ways that I analyze things or certain arguments that I pick and stuff like that, you're perfectly fine to stop the video and go watch some of the other debate YouTubers that exist, or just watch our workshop and things like that. I'm doing this to help people. I understand that I might not have like the best knowledge. Let's say someone who has a PhD on the topic, but this is for like debate purposes for similar motions that may come. Okay, with that said, let's look at the context behind the motion. And before actually looking at the context, let's take let's do like a role play idea, right? So you're at the round robin. It's round one and you receive this motion. So let's say you are from, you're not from the region, you don't know in general things about this motion, or maybe you are from the region, but let's say you really didn't care so much about history and stuff like that. That's also possible. Or in general, you get this motion and you don't really know about that much about this, like you don't know that many facts. You can still generate some kind of context through first principles or from knowledge that you had through other debate rounds, in order to generate arguments through this. So the process usually starts of thinking, what is the context behind this motion? Like, what things in general do I know about this? So like the first and most basic thing is that colonialism, unfortunately, existed in the region, where basically borders were borders were arbitrarily created, either randomly, you just randomly draw a border on the map, because like that's how you thought it would be nice for the country to be functioned, or sometimes intentionally you drew certain borders in order to divide populations and to pit them against each other as the colonizer. This is like a very unfortunate thing that happened, but it is a fact in many of these regions that the sole idea was to put divide and conquer tactics in order to put different populations against each other, so that it's much more easier to rule them when they're divided rather than unified. So post independence, it's very likely that many of these divisions still remain. many of the politics is on ethnic grounds, and this continues to be an issue. Obviously, it would be best if you do your own independent research, try to learn as much as possible. But this is a general principle that you can not for general, but first principle which you can operate. Secondly, the Igbo people want to have their own country, and the specific territory of Biafra that they broke out from did comprise like a lot of oil reserves in terms of natural resources throughout this region. So let's say you can't really do this via like how you say via first principles, but you know, after doing like some fast research, you can in general know about this information. And thirdly, for the context of the motion that we're talking about Britain as an actor, Britain in this particular set of scenario, in this particular motion and time period, had a lot of leverage and power over Nigeria. Militarily, they were much stronger than them. They also had a lot of economic tools. Structurally, this makes sense because if you were the main colonial power in the region, that means that a lot of the trade, a lot of the like economic knowledge, a lot of these particular like trade routes and things like that are in your control, so that you have both hard and soft power when you are influencing this decision. So this could be applied both during the intervention itself and post-intervention as to how you want to influence and shape these policies and things like that. Okay, so with that said, what are the different statements on government side? We're going to look it up after we go through them that we could generate. So the first and most basic, easiest way on Gov to run is just that this will most likely like prevent mass suffering and harms to the Igbo people in Biafra via this intervention. This is like the number one case that you might run. Maybe this could be in maybe you could like compare it to number 3, which is the right of self-determination case that you might run. That's also like, that's a fine way of looking at things, but if like debaters massively are like utilitarian in general, it's much more easy to persuade the judge that you are going to prevent some kind of harms to a group of people, rather than explaining why that group of people has like the right to self-determination and things like that. Not that that argument is invalid, it's just an easier path to victory to just go with the first and run with it, and you know, just run all of these outcomes and explain why they're important in the debate. The second thing that you could add to that is, even if the intervention failed in a states, peace negotiations are likely to be better. So this is like an even if statement. Let's say we're not able to deter them, we're not able to keep them to like stop bloodshed and things like that. When they come to the table, it's much more likely for you to have a much more stable and adequate form of coexistence between the two groups of people. And then fourthly, finally, that Nigeria and Biafra would function better without having like the Igbo minority or the Igbo community within them. So having the two countries actually separated would mean that they're likely to function a lot better between themselves. Cool, so let's analyze each of these arguments and explain how we could win with them. So the first and most important thing when we're looking at the first argument is that we have like the status quo is on our side. Even in the info slide it stated that we know that the Igbo people lost the war and surrendered in 1970, and after that a lot of harms were extrapolated to them. Most likely military atrocities happened while they were fighting. Most likely you have some forms of persecutions after the fact. Why? Because you want to make an example out of them, because Nigeria also has other different like groups of people and other different ethnicities that could also potentially want to like have their own separatist movement and things like that. So in order to like show an example to these groups of people, you want to be, you know, brutal to them, you want to limit their rights and things like that to stop like revolts in the future and things. So we know for a fact that these two things happened, and opposition can't really argue against these two things. Like that would be arguing against, you know, material reality and things like that. So this is like possibly the strong part of the case, where you actually don't need to spend that much time about it. You just have to characterize it and explain, okay guys, we're talking here about it, like we know what happened in our timeline. This is for sure something that is bad and is harmful. Okay, and then all you have to do is like explain on the counterfactual. So how would the military intervention resolve this? So the first most basic thing is, as it is established, Britain has the upper hand both militarily and economically. They have a lot of military technology, advanced weapons. This could range from aircraft, maybe tanks, and things like that. They also have a lot of soldiers, and they have a lot of military knowledge since they were basically fighting a world war 20, 30 years ago. And they're retaining all of these things, meaning that they are most likely on the strong part of things, and people understand this is a formidable military force to be opposed against. Then the second thing that you could add to this as a mechanism is just to say that the act of the intervention is likely to deter action on the side of Nigeria. Why? Well, because when Britain intervenes, and especially in the first few days, when, for example, they're fighting back your soldiers, they're destroying your supply lines, you're facing literally maybe bombings from airplanes and stuff like that. This means that you are now seeing very, very big losses towards yourself, both militarily, i.e., your soldiers and your military hardware are starting to destroy, meaning that your security and your fragile position post-independence is likely to be harmed. But also, secondly, simply the cost that you're paying. These are people that died that you later have to explain to your population why they died, why are they fighting this war, and stuff like that. Which, in general, if you look at their military calculus, in the first side, on the side of opposition, when they just invaded Biafra, they did this because they knew that it was more or less an easy-ish victory. Not that it was super easy, obviously, but it looked more possible. But now when you have a huge military power intervening and providing the military technology, maybe boots on the ground in a way, maybe tactical airstrikes and stuff like that, and now the cost that you have to pay in order to fight this war is huge, and you also have other considerations because you're a new nation. You want to set up your in general infrastructure. You want to focus on economic empowerment of your people, post-colonialism. You want to do all of these things. Then it is less likely that you will actually want to fight this war, and highly likely that you will give up. So basically, you could say even a very fast intervention could the initial days of the intervention could lead to a fast finish in a way of these problems. But even if you had to fight them, Britain is highly likely to be able to beat them back, and maybe in the medium term come to some kind of peace negotiation and things like that. Bottom line is the intervention is likely to be successful and stop the needless bloodshed. And even if you think about it, when you're positioned, you could be very nuanced and say, okay, we understand there are examples of interventions where it ended horribly. There are examples of interventions where it ended in a good way. We'll prove to you most likely, on balance, that this is a good intervention and most likely lead to these things. And then you just say, we know for a fact that without an intervention, a lot of problems happened in the region, and here's why the intervention is likely to resolve these two issues with the two mechanisms that we bring. Obviously, I'm not explaining them into super detail. You could, and maybe I'm missing some kind of context information. Like I said, you could read about it on your own. You could think about it and try to make these mechanisms stronger. Okay, then let's look at this second way of winning, or second argument that you could win, which is even if it's not successful, peace negotiations would be much better. And here it's important, you don't really have to characterize what an unsuccessful intervention might be. That's up for for Opp to do. All you have to do is to say, okay, let's say you can't really repel them back, they're still coming in and fighting. It's much more likely that when you're negotiating with them after the fact, that they are more likely to give you concessions in order to end the war. Basically by in general the same analysis that they don't want to fight the war. There isn't a lot of political capital left for it. They want to be able to extract some kind of benefits from them and things like that. So meaning when you sit down on the table and you try to negotiate, maybe you could negotiate a semi-autonomous function of your territory. Not that you secede it completely, but that you have some kind of autonomy in terms of how you govern yourself. So for example, you being able to celebrate your holidays, you being able to showcase your national identity, teach your history in school, do all of these things that in general semi-autonomous territories are throughout the world do, that are meaningfully important to people. Because this is the reason why they chose to leave, right? Because they themselves feel as if they're not part of this country, that they're another identity, that they want to have their own capacity to self-govern themselves and to self-actualize in a way. And they're able to get this via these particular policies that otherwise they might not be able to get because, the parliament decided that it's wrong, in Nigeria, or like the majority wants other like doesn't want them to have their identity and things like that. But also it could be economic policy. It could be you choosing a different economic model than let's say the main country wants. It could be when you're selling the oil that you have, you just give a proportion to Nigeria, but you keep most of the profits to yourself, so that both sides are happy. It's highly likely to be this way. But secondly, is that you stop the worst excessions of persecution. So, like we said, in the first part, in our world, we know for a fact that after the war ended, a lot of persecution happened to people. There were some atrocities done and things like that. If you're a separate-ish state, where, for example, there is like a underlining border in a sense, not exactly a border, but like a kind of border that exists there, some kind of agreement between the two countries that, for example, the police is likely to be made by people who are the Igbo people, not the other ethnicities in Nigeria. So they're from Biafra. That you're able to, for example, you're for example able to have like some kind of freedoms in terms of not being worried that tomorrow some kind of harms may happen to you in terms of them invading or maybe even doing something worse. Then that means that you're able to stop these very, very worst excesses. And they're likely because, firstly, Nigeria won't necessarily have the capacity to harm you the same way they did if they had to fight Britain. So meaning that their military is likely to be harmed. So they on a capacity level can't harm you the same way as they did in the status quo. But secondly, their incentives most likely will be for rebuilding because they had this whole crisis on their hands and they won't be so focused on oppressing you and stuff like that. Okay. So let's look at the right to self-determination principle. And I'd just like to note, there isn't a single way of analyzing this argument. People have written huge academic papers and books on this topic, and in general, there are arguments for, there are arguments against where the line for self-determination starts and stops. So there obviously is a lot more things to say. But in general, here's how I would analyze this principle if I had to. So basically, why do they deserve a country? Firstly, they were historically present before colonialism, and after the imposition of colonial rule happened, the Igbo society was suppressed and they weren't able to govern themselves. Meaning that as a recourse or as a way for them to basically receive back in a way their what is their right to rule over themselves, to have this territory and to be a people within it, to govern themselves, they need to have their own country to exercise this particular thing, whether it's in a literal sense through the policies that you do, whether it's in a feeling sense, how you feel, and how for you to feel as if you're a member of this country, you should be able to have this, and basically this immoral wrong needs to be fixed in a way this way. Secondly, you could say that they are culturally different from the other ethnicities, but also the majority group in Nigeria. They have other values. They have other religion. Sorry, they have other values. They have a different religion. They have a different language. They have a distinct culture that they have, meaning that these people don't feel themselves as part of this wider community. It's not something that they necessarily believe in. And because to a large degree, you need to feel as if you are a part of that group in order, for society to function, in order for you yourself to feel good and stuff like this. If you don't have your own country, you can't feel as if your identity is part of that. And so you should have the right to have a country that represents you with a group of people that you share common values, common understanding of the world, and you can call yourselves Biafran, basically. And finally, stopping discrimination and violence for them within their country, within the country of Nigeria. If you have legitimate security concerns, if you feel as if tomorrow something bad may happen to you, then you should have the right of self-defense to create your own collective sovereign of a state and defend yourself from this other country. So the bottom line is, all of these things mean that your self-determination basically aligns with the in general democratic principle of allowing people to choose their own a political future through a peaceful and democratic means, which means basically that this is a kind of a common value that collectively human beings have ascribed to. Not that necessarily democracy is the most correct way, but in general, the freedom to determine what your country is for yourself and what you want that to be should be something given to a group of people if they feel distinctly different. Otherwise, it's kind of a form of oppression in this particular case. So this is how you could prove this principle more or less. I know there are other ways. You can comment below how would you go about proving the principle, but these are just some lines of thoughts. And then finally we come to this is better for Nigeria in the long run argument. So what's the main thesis of this argument? It's very hard to run a country when you have a lot of internal division, especially to the level that it is right there. So firstly, politics become divided on ethnic means. This means that people just vote for other people based on their in-group and out-group. Like I vote for this candidate because he is Biafran, which means that this dilutes the perception from discussing actual policy matter, discussing actual issues and things like that, and people just get these votes based on, well, we have them because you have to vote for me and things like that. This creates a lot of room for corruption and abuse of the system, because if you have guaranteed votes, if you have to not give anything back because you are just not the other people, or you demonize the other side to such an extent that they, out of fear mongering, vote for you, then this means that you can kind of abuse the system. You can steal some money that could go for building critical infrastructure, that could go for healthcare, that could go for education. You could make a deal that really, really disadvantages your population, but to some foreign power, whether it's the United States, China, or whatever. And you could do so many things to in general harm the system that we kind of view as invisible. But if you track the whole process, you understand how many people are hurt because of this. Maybe in certain cases, their livelihood is lost. Maybe in certain cases, they go to a court and the court system is corrupt and abusive and they can't seek justice and things like that. It's in general degradation of the state and its basic functions once you have this. So if the two countries were to be separate, then this fear mongering doesn't happen because they don't exist in the same parameters of the same country, which means that it's much more easier for you after the fact to focus, okay, but this is not that big of an issue. What type of policies are you talking about? Which creates space for other political people to come. Secondly is that enforcement of policies and laws are just become harder if there is no trust in institutions. So how will you go to court if you don't trust this court? How will you go to the police if you don't trust them, if they're not part of your identity? How will you cooperate within state projects if you don't believe that this is your country and things like that? There are so many reasons as to why this will be physically hard to do and physically hard to function. In the worst case, this could result into some kind of fights or some kind of revolts and things like that. In the medium case, this just means that a lot of value that could otherwise be created by cooperation between people just doesn't get created because people don't trust each other and don't believe that they're part of the same country and things like that. And finally, just economic development becomes hard due to the risk of internal conflict propping up. You don't know if tomorrow, for example, Biafra won't choose to secede. You won't know if some kind of freedom movement won't pop up and things like that, which in general deters investors, especially in the short term when they're still you're afraid of investing in this country because you don't know what the future holds, but also kind of in the medium to long term when this could be an issue, when for example protests happen in Biafra and people are afraid that maybe a conflict may happen again and things like that. But if the two countries are separate, then this is in general not that big of a risk because the borders are fixed, they've come to an agreement and they can move on. So yeah, that's basically the government case. So these are different lines of analysis that you could run. Obviously, the easiest way to run is to just say the intervention is necessary, it saves a lot of people. But all of these other things are ways for you to create spaces to extend from closing government. And maybe, OG misses the most basic line about saving lives and they run self-determination instead and waste their time on that as well. Not waste their time, but it's harder to weigh and run this claim within the debate, even though to some extent you have to do it. Okay. So let's look at the opposition. So there are basically three broad lines of analysis that are, in my opinion, pretty high burden that you need some significant time to explain. So the first is that the intervention will cause more secessionist violence in Nigeria and in other countries. The second is that the Soviet Union might be drawn into the conflict. And the third is that the intervention may result in a protracted war, which could lead to more death on both sides. All of these are fair ways to win the debate, basically, if you choose to run either or. So let's look at the first argument, which is this will create more violence, basically, more secessionist violence and things like that. And I think the best intuition pump you could give here is the Arab Spring, which is like a very recent thing where it started with just a protest in Tunisia, but then it had ripple effects elsewhere. Like, even though people really before it didn't seem like they had status quo bias, they really didn't think that there would be like changes and in certain cases even civil wars across the Arab countries, but ultimately it did happen this way. And why was this the case? Well, the first basic reason is that in the current world, in the status quo, in our timeline, the general international consensus was that secessions need to be avoided. And there actually aren't that many of effective secessions happening. Like, there are some, but they're obviously not a majority or something like that. The reason for this, and if you look at if you after that you kind of learn on your own about Biafra and how the conflict happened and things like that, is that actually most of the world powers kind of agreed that they didn't want the state of Biafra to come into power. They wanted to keep it the way it is, probably because they had self-interest incentive to keep stability so that they could continue resource extraction from the continent in a more softer way. Or maybe, who knows, we never know what is the true incentive of these countries at the end of the day, but this could be it. So in general, having a particularly successful example could mean that a change in the perception, because in our current world, this option wasn't very viable. Like, you wouldn't necessarily think that it would be very successful, but also that you will have a lot of cost to it, like people dying, infrastructure being destroyed, war being horrible, and things like that. However, in the alternative world, when Britain backs up this country and, they have success, especially, in the first days, probably, when you're, for example, pushing back some of the Nigerian troops and things like that, then this, in general, increases the likelihood of other regions also going, well, yeah, maybe we should also do the exact same thing, and maybe we could have success and things like that. So the question that you need to ask is, why is this a tipping point in this happening? There are probably two reasons for it. The first is optics and narratives and the way that you sell something. It's much more easier to sell the likelihood of a success to your own population when it has already happened to someone. Like, you can characterize, go to the way that you need to characterize people who in general support independence and things like that is that they want it, but they're also scared of losing more than they actually earn. They're scared of, for example, war happening. They're scared of tomorrow them being oppressed even more and things like that. But now when you have this example of a relative success, especially in the first days, and you have leaders that could use persuasive rhetorics towards their population, saying, yes, we can also do it, yes, look, they were able to do it, that why can't we, and things like that, and that means that they're much more likely to think that it is a good option, and to think that they'll try to utilize a way of violence and trying to take back their try to find their independence and things like that. Secondly, you could use the momentum of the chaos. So while, for example, Nigeria is preoccupied with this war and fighting the Brits, probably the other territories and the other ethnicities that also exist there would go, well, yeah, this is probably the best time that we could have this, because they're preoccupied fighting the British forces. That this means that now is the time for us to strike and for us to gather our independence. And you'll be, because you don't know if tomorrow there will be an opportunity like this. This is the moment when you mobilize your forces and you declare independence in another territory and things like that, which could cause the chain effect that continues this in other places. Now, the bottom line is that violence will increase. The potential Gov response to this is, but if we in general support Biafra having its independence and things like that, then we should probably support these things, right? Well, not exactly, because, and here we'll talk about two ways that you are able to do this. Firstly is that Britain can't intervene everywhere. Firstly, the motion doesn't say that they would have the fiat to do this. But secondly, no country has the political and economic capital to do this many times, to intervene many times. This won't stop countries from trying to seek their independence, but that doesn't mean that you have a control factor in the region to also help them out and things like that. So basically, why is this bad? Self-determination is a right, but it also must be weighed against other considerations. So human rights, human life, basic human rights, like for example, sanitation, water, electricity, food, and things like that. Violence and warfare harms both of these things, and it harms them to a massive scale. Like it's fairly intuitive. We don't really have to explain it that much. But the second way that you could say is that alternatives are on the table. You could reach some kind of power sharing agreement between yourself. You could have slow and incremental change that could lead to long-term deals that might happen and things like that. Violence shouldn't always be on the table and should always be chosen, especially if it has like ripple effects and things like that, even if it's for a noble goal in this particular moment. So yeah, so this is like how you finish this argument, and you just explain if this were to happen in many regions and this leads to a lot of collateral damage, we would prefer on the utilitarian calculus to not harm so many people and things like that. Second way to read this debate from Opp is just to say that the Soviet Union is likely to intervene. So what's like the context or the status quo? In a status quo, they actually backed Nigeria, and they weren't really super interested in fighting in the region. The reason for this is that kind of like the US, the UK, and the USSR were basically on the same page, and the USSR didn't really want to intervene because they thought if they intervened that maybe this would draw in other powers as well, other Western powers and things like that. So what they kind of did is they agreed with Britain to, for the Brits to have their intervention of a sort on the side of Nigeria, even though they weren't necessarily intervening, they were kind of just backing them, and for things to play out their course. However, in the alternative timeline, which is like a totally different timeline where the United Kingdom intervenes on the side of Biafra, then this totally shifts their incentive calculus. Because now the USSR, the side that they're backing, which is the Nigerian side, the other side is backed by basically not world power, but one of the world-ish powers, Western country with a fairly strong military and economy and things like that. And now, like after you have this moment of them being directly involved in the region, and there is no consensus between the three powers, well, this is the moment where you actually want to strike back against your enemy and things like that. But why, you might ask? So let's actually analyze these reasons. So the first basic reason is that already there is precedent. Like they want to spread communism, or maybe not spread communism, but have allies within regions. They did this in other parts in the world, so like Korea, Vietnam, and they also tried to do it in Africa as well, in many African countries and things like that. Maybe it could be pure coincidence that they didn't necessarily go to Nigeria and wanted to be so interventionist. But right now, when there is a Western power there that is directly intervening, now is the moment where you're like, aha, well, that means that I also need to go in, because I can't just allow them that easily to take back to intervene in this territory. As a world power, you want to project your power. You want to say no, I am opposed to this. You want to showcase your military strength to the world, so that countries can respect you and see you as a legitimate ally to have and things like that, and stuff like this. Secondly, is that most likely the Soviet Union will perceive this just as an attempt by the UK to steal the oil reserves in Biafra. So you would like to compete with them, or at least make it hard for them to secure it. So you would like to basically beat them back in order for you to have special rights to that oil, or so that they don't necessarily benefit from that oil. The bottom line is that this is a significant incentive shift in the incentives of the USSR, which could mean, for the best case on government, they just supply weapons to Nigeria, which is a big impact if they are supplying them. Because keep in mind, this is the Cold War. At this time, the Russians also had fairly good planes, fairly good tanks, fairly good weaponry and things like that. But also, maybe in the worst case, this could mean you sending Russian boots on the ground that are fighting against the British in the conflict, because they deem it as important to intervene against them, and things like that. Yeah. Which, all of this is very bad, because you get more bloodshed, more conflict. It also impacts the mechanism of other countries trying to secede, because now you have an all-out conflict and creating the ripple effect. So there are many ways to position this argument, or extension if you're CO. And finally, there's just the protracted war case. There are many incentives on Nigeria that directly respond to the incentives coming from government, that they would want to that they would want to like continue fighting for this. So the first is like if you lose Biafra, you lose the oil, which is crucial, you know, in terms of building your economy, building your new state, and things like that. So like the benefits that you are receiving are likely to be a lot. If you want to give like an intuition pump with something that's more in the news, like look at the situation with Guyana and Venezuela, where basically Venezuela literally wants to invade the Essequibo region because of oil reserves and things like that. Countries are willing to do things like this in order to secure crucial revenue that is important for them for building the state, or you know, if they're corrupt, to just steal the money. But this is probably the Bulgarian in me speaking. Secondly, you want to like power project, so you want to send a signal to the other regions that they can't do this, that you necessarily won't allow them to secede because you're afraid if this is successful, then the other region might also want to secede. And finally, security concerns, which like if Biafra were to pull away and become its own country, you don't know what their incentives are. You don't know if in 20 or 30 years they decide to invade you because they want something. You don't know if, for example, they'll fund terrorism in your country. All things are possible on the table, and because you have this uncertainty, you would prefer to have this territory for yourself. Bottom line is there very strong incentive to continue the fighting even if the British intervene, meaning that you have a huge incentive to fight against them, meaning that you have a huge incentive for unnecessary bloodshed to happen. Let's look at then the incentives of Britain. So basically, the motion gives fiat for intervention, but that doesn't mean that you can change some of the material realities of intervention. So what does this mean? Firstly, most likely there will be a certain part of the population that would just question the need for this intervention. This population also votes and is important in election cycles. So because you know you don't really want to antagonize them that much to that extent, you would likely to be very controlled in your intervention. So you wouldn't like for example, I don't know, British soldiers' lives to be lost. You won't want to waste a lot of money on it. You'd like to be very controlled. But secondly, you don't want to be seen as too military engaged, because you as a politician don't want to have like a lot of military media scrutiny against you. This is literally the time when the Vietnam War was happening, when you have the hippie movement in America and things like that you could see for yourself. So you don't necessarily want to be seen as super militaristic, because again, you don't want to lose your elections. There's probably other reasons. I just think that these are two main incentives that would make that Britain won't like donate huge parts of its military and its economy towards this particular resource war. So that means that they don't really have, even if they have an advantage, they won't really use that much of the advantage to fight them and things like that. So conclusion, the war won't be a short sweep. This means that people will lose their lives on both sides of the house. The effects will be felt throughout the years, so you have like increased political risk, lack of investment, all of these things. And finally, you could be put in like this mini Cold War scenario where basically, you know, you have like two opposing forces against one another that are just in a stalemate, similar to what the Russia-Ukraine war is right now, which could mean, you know, like it's very hard for you like to develop either or both countries if they're in this stalemate position between each other and things like that. And all you have to do then is to say, yes, we understand like that the status quo is also horrible, but like there are levels to this. It could become worse. It could mean more people die. It could mean more people get hurt, and things like that. And you could beat Gov on their own metric, and things like that. Whew, cool. This was the video. Again, like research it on your own. Try to learn about the subject. But in general, I guess this video is a good case study on like how to approach motions like this, especially if you don't really have that information, how to use first principles and stuff like that, and how to build the cases. Hope this was helpful. Please like and subscribe, and yeah, keep your eyes open for any scammers stealing these videos. See you in the next one.